Oh, you didn't think I'd miss this one, did you? Hello and welcome to my guide for the Dominating Blow Guardian in Path of Exile Mirage. A very quick disclaimer about the footage in this guide. I haven't played this build in a while, so most in-game footage is going to be from an older version of the game or from a recent character I made just to practice on. First of all, why should you play this build? Well, it's a tanky league starter that gets really solid DPS on very budget gear. It's an all-rounder that can farm just about anything on league start, and it scales up to about 100 million DPS with reasonable investment. In my opinion, it's also more fun than other minion builds since it is more involved and forces you to play on the front lines with your minions. We get capped block and spell block with zero investment. It all comes from a weapon base and the passive skill tree, so mapping is very safe. And this build just got significantly buffed, so there's never been a better time to play it. There are also 0 required uniques for this build, so you can play it in SSF, but there are a few uniques that do give big time power increases. But why shouldn't you play this build? There are 3 main points against this build I can think of. The first is that mapping is a bit slower than other good league starters, but I do have something in this guide to help with that. Second is if you want to farm Legion as your main strategy, just don't play this build. This build is really bad at Legion. There are a few endgame bosses that are painful for this build because of ground degen effects, namely Maven, Cirrus, and Uber Elder, but everything else should go smoothly. You just might need to ask for help on those bosses if you want to do them early on. Also, on the other hand, regarding this build being buffed, gear for it could be more expensive than normal if it becomes a flavor of the month build. And finally, if you like investing multiple mirrors into a build, this is not the right build for that. This build is better on low to medium budgets and can clear all game content on those budgets, but there are other better builds that benefit way more from extreme currency investment. But how do you actually play Dominating Blow? Dominating Blow is a combination melee attack and minion skill that you can get as early as Act 3 after killing Gravicius. I wouldn't recommend equipping it right away when you get it, but I'll get more into that later. Once you have it equipped, you can use it to swing your melee weapon in what is basically just a regular default attack, but if an enemy hit by it dies within the next 3 seconds, they will spawn a minion for you. We focus on building minion damage rather than our own damage, so your own attack damage will be low, but it will still be plenty to kill normal monsters and start spawning minions. It also has a chance to spawn a minion when attacking a boss or rare monster, so you don't need to worry about going into those fights without any minions. And 2 of those things I just mentioned are actually buffs from this upcoming patch. First is the enemies dying within 3 seconds of being hit, that used to be 1 second, and second is the chance to spawn a minion when hitting a rare monster or boss, that used to be only on a boss. Once you are up and running, the playstyle while mapping is basically to attack the first pack of monsters until you have a few minions, then attack each subsequent monster pack once or twice just to maintain your army while your army takes care of most of the work. Before I go into how we build this character, if you happen to be familiar with my old guide to this build, let me just update you on the main differences between the old build guide and this one. We no longer build around physical damage and impale. Instead, we build around the Guardian's free damage auras and scaling minion crit because the auras give so much base damage. We have slightly less life and life regen than the old build, but in exchange we have way more damage, and we get fully capped on block and spell block without glancing blows. We are taking one of the Bloodline Ascendancies because it is insanely strong, and other than that, this whole guide should look pretty familiar to you if you knew the old guide. So let's get into what the character build will look like in the endgame. I'll go over what to take in the campaign and when after this. First, I want you to see what the character looks like when it is all put together. The POB that I will be referencing throughout this video is linked in the description below. Also, before I get into the weeds of the POB, I know there is one question you are going to have right away. The reason there are 2 6-link setups for Val Domination listed in the endgame POB is that it's actually just the one setup, but I duplicated it in POB to separate the DPS calculations for Dominating Blow minions versus Val Domination minions. Dominating Blow is ×9 because you can have 9 normal minions. Val Domination is ×3 because you can have 3 Ascended minions. Realistically, you will usually only have 1 or 2 Ascended minions, so these DPS numbers are a bit inflated. You can set this counter to 1 or 2 if you want to see more accurate numbers. Keep in mind though, you can hold 3 charges of Val Domination and use them all at once when you need them, like on a boss. There being 2 Val Domination setups here is also why there is a warning down here, so you can ignore this. It is just one 6-link setup, but I don't know of a better way to separate the DPS calculations for Dominating Blow and Val Domination. If you know a better way, please let me know. With that out of the way, let's get started on building the character, starting with the gems. For our main 6-link, we use Dominating Blow with Multi-Strike, Melee Splash, Minion Damage, Fresh Meat, and Predator. The reason there's a Ruthless gem listed here and Melee Splash is unchecked is to show that you can swap out Melee Splash for Ruthless while fighting Pinnacle bosses to get some extra DPS. You won't ever need to do this while mapping, as you will have more than enough DPS even with Melee Splash socketed. It's just some tech for fighting big bosses. You will use Melee Splash 99.9% of the time. Just if you're fighting just a big endgame boss and you want more damage, you can socket in Ruthless instead. Before we go any further, I need to talk about how Fresh Meat support works and why we are using it now. Fresh Meat gives minions Adrenaline and a giant boost to crit for the first 10% of your minion's duration. The duration of Dominating Blow minions is being buffed to 30 seconds this patch, and we get 44% increased duration on our passive tree, so they will be active for 43.2 seconds. This means that each minion will be turbo buffed for 4.3 seconds on spawn. Dominating Blow also kills the oldest minion and replaces it with a new one when going over the minion count limit. This means that you have to replace them at a rate slightly faster than 2 minions per second to keep permanent uptime on Fresh Meat. This is extremely easy while mapping, but will probably be just slightly slower than that while bossing. This does mean the DPS calculations in the PoB are slightly inflated, but Fresh Meat support is still by far the best support gem in this slot, even despite that. You can untick Is Fresh Meat Active in PoB to see how much it drops the DPS, and the real DPS will be somewhere between those two numbers, but much closer to the higher number when it is active. If you are using Val Domination, those minions get replaced much less often, so their DPS calculation is more inflated by Fresh Meat support than the regular minions. Since we are using a two-handed weapon that we can 6-link, that means we can get another 6-link setup in our body armor. For that, we are using Raise Spectre, Animate Guardian, Minion Life, Feeding Frenzy, Elemental Army, and Maim. This is an entirely supportive setup that buffs us in a bunch of different ways that I'll go into when I explain the Spectres and Animate Guardian gear. If you really hate using AG, you can use Summon Holy Relic instead, but I promise AG is worth it. The main Spectres we'll be using are a Host Chieftain, a Carnage Chieftain, and a Perfect Forest Warrior, not Tiger. Next we have our Aura setup. We're using Determination, Summon Skitterbots, Haste, and a low-level Precision. Eventually, we'll swap out the Precision for Enlighten to make room for Aspect of the Spider. The reason we aren't running any big damage auras is because our Ascendancy already effectively gives us level 25 versions of Hatred, Anger, and Wrath all for free. Next we have the Evergreen Cast When Damage Taken Molten Shell, just for some extra defenses. Leap Slam with faster attacks is our main movement skill. During the campaign, we will also use Frost Blink. And early on in the campaign, you can grab Shield Charge if you want, just because it's cheaper than Leap Slam and usually faster until you can get a decent weapon. Finally, we have 4 loose gems that don't need to be linked together in Assassin's Mark, Spirit Offering, Convocation, and Desecrate. If you hate having this many buttons to manage, you can put 3 of these on Arcanist brand, but it costs a gem socket to do so. Just remember that Assassin's Mark only needs to be cast once per fight. Desecrate is only needed for Spirit Offering and only if there are no other corpses around. And Convocation can be automated either with the Automation support gem, which costs yet another gem socket, or with the Numlock trick on PC. And for the Numlock trick, you'll just have to look that up. If you really want to automate those as much as possible using Arcanist brand and automation support, you can probably drop the Cast When Damage Taken Molten Shell setup to make room for it. You should still be fine on defenses without it. Next, let's go into the items for this build, and there's really only a few things I need to mention. Essentially, you are building to increase the gem level of Dominating Blow and get as much minion damage as possible, all while keeping your resistances capped and your life pool reasonably high. All of these items in the PoB are just examples for each stage of progression. You don't need these exact stats, but they should give you an idea of what to look for. We are using a War Staff because it is the easiest way to get modifiers that increase gem levels in a 6-link, while also having enough damage that we can kill normal monsters and spawn our minions, all while giving us enough base block chance that we can get block capped entirely from the passive tree. The best way to craft this is to use Essences of Fear for minion damage, look for mods that increase socketed gem levels or melee gem levels, and ideally look for decent attack speed. You can benchcraft attack speed early on, but later on you will be benchcrafting minion attack speed. You will also need at least one source of Mana Leech somewhere in the build if you don't want to use a Mana Flask or Clarity Aura. The best place to get that is on a weapon because there are only 2 other weapon suffixes that we care about. If you can't get Mana Leech on a weapon, then you can also get it on rings or gloves, but those have a higher opportunity cost. Later on, you can also get it from a Cluster Jewel node, especially on a good Megalomaniac. Also, try to find a helmet with +2 to level of all minion skill gems and whatever other good stats you can get on it. Even if the stats are bad, the +2 to level of all minion skill gems is probably worth it. Get a medium Cluster Jewel with the node Blessed Rebirth on it as early as you can. It doesn't matter what else it has on it at all, if anything. Ideally, you'll get one that also has Life from Death and some useful stats on it. So let's talk about the few unique items that are really good for the build. First up is Spore Guard. While there are much better body armors in the game than this offers an enemy explosion effect that is active whenever we are stationary, which is every time we stop to attack with Dominating Blow. When I said there was something in the guide to help with map clear, this is it. It can also be anointed, and Mark the Prey is a very cheap anointment that adds a ton of DPS. You can swap off of Spore Guard for a more high-end rare body armor while fighting pinnacle bosses if you want, but there really isn't anything better for mapping on this build. The explosion effect is really good. Moving on to the uniques that we use a bit deeper into the endgame, first up is Replica Dragonfang's Flight. This can either be dirt cheap or extremely expensive depending how meta the build is. Either way, it's +3 gem levels to Dominating Blow, so we want it. Next is Admiral's Arrogance. These unique gloves come from the pirate boss fight in the Settlers mechanic. The only stat we care about on them is the +3 levels to melee skill gems, since Dominating Blow is a melee skill. If you have the currency for it, getting more attack speed is always nice too. These will probably be rarer and more expensive than normal now that shipping has been reworked and there is less incentive for anyone who isn't focused on it to interact with it. Next, and this is probably the most expensive item in this list, is Darkness Enthroned, especially if perfect rolled. You can get so much from this, like minion stats or life or resistances or attributes or even shock immunity from a single Abyssal Jewel. If you combine that shock immunity with a Storm Shroud Jewel, you can be completely ailment immune just from this belt and a jewel. It's okay to get one that's not quite 100% rolled early on, but eventually you definitely want one that is 100%. The final unique to mention is Megalomaniac. If you decide to go deep into building expensive cluster jewels, then there is a lot Megalomaniac can offer, but I won't go into detail on it. This one, for example, gives Mana Leech, free endurance charges, and a big DPS increase. Now let's talk about the passive tree, and I'm going to start from Act 1 because this is a good point to show you that I've set up loadouts in PoB for every single act and every stage of endgame progression. You can click this drop down up here to change between them, and it will update the passive tree, items, skills, and config tab all at once. Don't worry about the specifics of the items in the campaign leveling sections. They are mainly just references to show what stats you can be looking for, and just there to make sure everything's working and there's no warnings or errors in the PoB during the campaign. The PoB is linked in the description and will default to the deep endgame loadout, just because that is the most realistically complete version of the build. So in Act 1, we first head down toward Grave Pact, and then back up toward Discipline and Training. Act 2, we move up through these minion wheels and take this minion defense mastery for minions recover 5% of life on minion death. This makes your permanent minions like Spectres practically immortal during the campaign. We will get this from a cluster jewel in the endgame, so we will remove this later. Act 3, we head through these life nodes towards Sovereignty, then toward more minion damage. This is around the time where you start picking up big aura gems in Act 3, so Sovereignty should help with using them all. Act 4, we fill out the minion damage nodes and then head south from there. For your first Ascendancy around Act 4, or at the end of Act 3 if you want, take Radiant Crusade. That minion can carry the entire campaign alone and will remain relevant into at least the early endgame. Act 5 is really short, but we head down here and we grab Divine Shield and Resolute Technique. This is the point where you can swap to Dominating Blow if you want, but I'll go into that more when talking about what gems to take while leveling. In Act 6, we go back to the northeast section of the build and head toward Enduring Bond. Around Act 7, we should have enough points to grab some more life, and these 2 spell block nodes, which mainly just give us access to this mana mastery for mana reservation efficiency. At this point, we've filled out the key points in the build, so around Act 8 is when I start putting points into staff block nodes, and look for a staff to use if I haven't found one already. If you find a staff that even has +1 melee gem level on it, it's probably worth using for now. Second ascendancy to take is Unwavering Crusade. This will probably double your total DPS at this point, and is what we are building around in the endgame. Act 9 is just more staff block and more life. Act 10 is really short, so just finish up the life or staff block nodes and take this spell block wheel up here. For your third ascendancy, take Bastion of Hope. This is how we get capped on block and spell block. Meeting the attack condition is easy because we're an attack build, but for the spell condition, this is why we want to always be casting Convocation or just automate it because that counts too. Once we get into early endgame, I already mentioned you should get this Cluster Jewel with Blessed Rebirth as soon as possible. It makes the whole build feel much better. You can also head up here for Minion Crit, which we are building around now, and grab some more life here and here. Also, you can take these 2 small points for minion damage since they are pretty efficient. You could have taken them in the campaign too, but it would delay everything else by 2 points. It's up to you. Your final ascendancy node when you do Uber Lab is Time of Need. It's pretty convenient to have early on, but it's not the best ascendancy point, so we will be replacing it with a Bloodline Ascendancy later on. Once we get a bit deeper into endgame, the main things I like to get are a better Cluster Jewel, and then as many 2-point jewel sockets as I can, because they make it easy to fix any stats I'm missing. I also really like this ailment reduction wheel up here. It might seem like bait, but if you combine this wheel with the Brine King and Garukhan Pantheon powers, you get practical immunity to shock and chill, plus the freeze immunity from Brine King, and you get access to the Corrupted Blood immunity mastery. You can replace all of this with a Storm Shroud setup and a Corrupted Jewel implicit later on, but for now this is a really efficient way to handle most ailment immunities. The only one you really have to worry about is still Ignite. Now that we are a bit further into endgame, it's time to get our Bloodline Ascendancy. We are using the Lycia Bloodline, which means you will need to complete an entire Forbidden Sanctum, just once though. Once you've done that, unspec your points from Time of Need and put them into Bitter Heresy. This point is absolutely insane. It is lying to you in PoB about how much damage it is adding. It is actually much, much more than that, because PoB isn't considering that this is also your only source of Profane Ground. Watch how much the DPS of this deep endgame loadout drops when I untick Enemy on Profane Ground and Minion on Profane Ground. That is nearly a 30% total DPS drop. This is a 35 million DPS Ascendancy node. Now, in order for this to work, you need a reliable source of consecrated ground. The easiest way to do this is just with a magic sulfur flask with a prefix mod that makes sure it is up all the time, like this one. This is a good time also to mention our flask setup. Ideally, we are using flasks that gain charges when we are hit. Since we are a melee build with low evasion, this should keep them full all the time, and then enchant them to auto-use when they reach full charges. The best flasks for us besides our life flask are granite, jade, quicksilver, and sulfur, but we only need the sulfur flask after getting the Lycia Bloodline. Until then, you can use anything else you want. Quartz is also pretty good, mainly because it gives phasing. A quick note here, you might be thinking, what about Bottled Faith? Bottled Faith is a sulfur flask. The problem with that is that we are no longer creating consecrated ground, we are creating profane ground, so all of the secondary effects of Bottled Faith will not work. So it is not worth using instead of just a regular sulfur flask. And it is still worth it. The amount of DPS we get from the Lycia Bloodline is way more than what we would have got from using a Bottled Faith instead. By the way, everything I'm going over here in this guide, and I mean pretty much everything, is all in the notes tab of this PoB. Now, since I didn't have a better place to put this, let's talk about what skills to use while leveling in the campaign. I used to use Absolution starting at the end of Act 1, but since Templar now starts with Holy Strike, which is also a minion skill, I am going to use that all the way until the swap to Dominating Blow. The PoB right now says Glacial Hammer, but that is just a placeholder for Holy Strike because it isn't in PoB yet. So in Act 1, you pick up Holy Strike right at the beginning, then you can link it to Ancestral Call and Summon Phantasm pretty early. I usually grab Smite right when I enter a town as my quest reward for Hillock, and weave it between every few other attacks to keep the lightning damage aura going. It also buffs all of your minions. Grab Holy Flame Totem for some extra single target DPS for Brutus. You also probably want to put Summon Phantasm on this because it is a really strong early single target DPS combo, and if you have a third link you could put added fire damage or added lightning damage, whatever. Summon Holy Relic is great supplemental DPS all the way to early endgame. Raise Zombie is very optional and pretty useless before you have Holy Relic to keep them alive, but still worth using once you actually can sustain them. Leap Slam and Frostblink are our movement skills for the campaign. Clarity, just so we don't need to use a mana flask. And if you really want to boost the damage of your totem and phantasms, you can pick up Flame Wall, but that's starting to be a lot of buttons. Act 2, the only new things to pick up are Herald of Purity and Molten Shell. Maybe Culling Strike if you have a green link to use. Help a Lyra because it is really hard to beat plus 15 all elemental resistances for one skill point. Act 3 gives us Determination. You can grab a Curse if you want here, but we'll replace it with Assassin's Mark later anyway. We also get Dominating Blow as a quest reward for killing Gravicius here, so make sure you grab it and start leveling it in your weapon swap. You can also buy Raise Spectre and Animate Guardian here and start leveling them if you have the currency for it. I think they each cost a Chance Orb. In Act 4, you get a free Golem, so either take Carrion or Stone Golem. Either is fine, but we won't be keeping either of them into endgame. You can also pick up Cast when Damage Taken at the end of the act if you have an Orb of Alchemy already. And if you want, you can put your Golem and your Molten Shell together on that setup, but you'll probably need Life Tap because the mana cost of the Golem will be too high if you do that. Oh, you also get Multi-Strike as a quest reward at the end of Act 4, so make sure to take that. Act 5 is when I recommend switching to Dominating Blow because we now have Multi-Strike and enough passive points to get Resolute Technique. You should also go back to Act 1 and buy Melee Splash support if you didn't already. Link Dom Blow to Multi-Strike, Melee Splash, and Minion damage ideally, or any other damage support in the fourth link if you don't have the right colors. But you definitely want those 3 red links, and then the fourth one can just be whatever. Act 6, you get access to all of the gems now, so check the POB and make sure you have everything you'll be using for the rest of the campaign. At the very least, you should buy Assassin's Mark, Feeding Frenzy, and Convocation here. For the rest of the gems, you can just look at the Gems tab or the Notes tab in the POB. And after that, there isn't anything left to talk about for gems in the campaign. You should have the build online now. Just keep referencing the Gems tab in the appropriate loadout to make sure you didn't miss anything. You should now have everything you need to get started with this build, so I'm just going to leave you with recommendations on Spectres and Animate Guardian gear. For Spectres, the easiest 2 to get that are both very good are Carnage Chieftain and Host Chieftain. You can get both from the Ashen Fields in Act 7. You can even grab one during the campaign if you feel like it. If you anoint Death Attunement on your amulet, which I've recommended in every endgame loadout, you get +1 max Spectre. Somewhat early on, the easiest good third Spectre to get is Arena Master from any Warlord influenced map. We aren't using Demon Harpy anymore because this isn't a pure physical build, and we aren't using Pale Seraphim anymore because it appears to have always been bugged in a severely detrimental way. The actual best third Spectre to get once you have some currency is a Perfect Forest Warrior, not Tiger. This gives Onslaught to you and all your minions as long as it is nearby. I like this a lot better than the Tiger because the Tiger is way too expensive and it lets us run our own Haste Aura at max level. The Tiger's Haste Aura is only equivalent to a level 10 Haste gem, so your 3 Spectres should be Host Chieftain, Carnage Chieftain, and Perfect Forest Warrior. For Animate Guardian, you can make a really cheap budget one with Dying Breath, Learcast, Southbound, and any rare boots and armor. Ideally, you want Gruthkul's Pelt as the body armor, but it's usually expensive on League start. Just be aware that any Animate Guardian you make without Gruthkul's Pelt is not going to stay alive, but at least you don't lose the equipment on the Animate Guardian anymore. Once you have the currency to invest in Animate Guardian, use Kingmaker, Learcast, Corrupted Southbound with increased life implicit, Gruthkul's Pelt, and rare boots with the modifier drops brittle ground while moving. That's pretty much it for the whole guide, and I can already think of some questions you might have, so let me just rapid fire some answers to them. There are no awakened gems in the POB because they don't exist anymore, and the new exceptional gems aren't in POB yet. Yes, that does mean this build will be even stronger than the POB is showing once you get some exceptional gems. Yes, you can get more gem levels to Dominating Blow from other sources, but there is no reason to go above gem level 30. I've included only the easiest ways to reach that breakpoint. If you want to know where all of the checked modifiers in the config tab come from, every single one of them is explained in the notes tab of the POB. We probably won't be using the new imbued gem corruptions on Dominating Blow because Val Domination is too good to give up. There might be some that are worth using on our secondary gems though. We will probably use the new Exemplar support gem eventually, but it requires a setup that can't use Resolute Technique. The best way to get around this is probably with a crafted multi-mod weapon that has hits can't be evaded and can still be crafted with minion attack speed. But then it's going to be very hard to get good crit chance on that weapon as well, so it just might not be worth using. In conclusion, if you choose to play this build in the upcoming league and you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out to me in the comments. Good luck on your league start.